Hey, and welcome to the Weed Out, where we weed out the nonsense and talk about the bullshit in our backyards. I'm Spencer Fox Peterson with my co host, as always.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanna May Booty.
This week, we are glad to have our friend Andrew back on. He is a journalist that has been on to talk about public records requests in the past. So please go check those episodes out and all his wonderful information. He writes for a publication that he publishes called The Mass Dump. You can follow him on Substack and all the social medias. We will link that stuff in the web episode notes, www.theweedout.com, and on our Substack. Same name. Welcome back, Andrew.
Thanks. Good to be here again.
This week we have Andrew on discussing his lawsuit with the Northwestern DA, DA Sullivan of Massachusetts, and I'd love to hear more about that. So, Andrew, what is a DA?
DAs they're called district attorneys because they represent a particular district. I think technically they are considered like state actors, but they are like elected officials who are elected to oversee a particular region of the state.
So he's not federal, I guess.
No, he's a state level prosecutor. That's correct.
Great. And so he's responsible for charging decisions and focus of his office in as far as prosecutions go, which can go from anything from low level petty crime all the way up to bigger crimes, including murder and such. So he obviously has a relationship with that office, works with police, they're partners, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, all DAs are basically partnered with the police because the police are the people who are bringing most of the, allegations of criminal activity to them. They're bringing the cases, they're arresting people and telling the DA what charges to press. The police departments, basically they're working with the DA's office on a daily basis. I mean, particularly like a larger police department is probably going to be arresting people, constantly, and they're taking those charges to the DA's office. So they have a very intimate relationship. It's hard to even say that they're separate in a sense because of how close that relationship is.
So there would be a benefit to withholding or a detriment for sharing information and possibly making their jobs harder. Because if you have a bunch of officers that their character could be impugned or called into question, rather, that makes being a prosecutor a lot harder. At least it would seem to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about the reasons why a police department would not want information about their officers getting out that reflects negatively on them, it's basically the same thing. I mean, with the police department, there's like an issue of liability of one of their employees. Like if they get sued, I think that's a bit less of an issue with the DA. I mean, there are cases where if a DA is involved in, like, say, something wrongful, maybe it could open them up to liability. But I would say the main reason that they might not want this information getting out is like sort of embarrassment. Uh, they don't want people to know that they are working with officers who have been, in some cases, literally charged by them, by this DA with crimes, or at the very least, they've been accused of misconduct. And actually, that's sort of what my records request is getting at, which is that I went to all the DAs in the state last year in January, and I requested what are called Brady lists. This is not something that every DA's office keeps, but a lot of them do. It gets its name from this Supreme Court case in the early 60s called Brady v. Maryland. And that case basically stands for the idea that the government is going to prosecute you. For you to have a fair trial, if the government is aware of any evidence that could be beneficial to your defense, then they have to turn that over to you, because if they have that information and they just hide it from you, how can you say that that person has had a fair trial? And one type of information that they have to disclose is something that would potentially reflect negatively on like the credibility of a witness who is involved in the case, who might be testifying against you. And, since the DAs are working with police on a daily basis, those police witnesses are potentially involved in lots of different cases. And so some DAs have found that the best way of handling this is to create a list of officers where they already know that there is some sort of issue with that officer, like maybe an investigation found that the officer had lost. And once it's on a list, it's very easy for when a DA is, rather, I'm sorry, when an assistant district attorney, the low-level prosecutors who do most of the actual work in courtrooms, when they get a case, they can look at the name of the officer on the report. They can, cross-reference with the Brady list, and they can say, oh, look, officer so-and-so is on the Brady list. I'm going to have to make sure I give that information to the defense. Unfortunately, though, this is not required to have these lists, even though disclosing the information is required. So not all prosecutors have them. The Northwestern DA, I found, did not have one of these lists, but they do have a policy of disclosing this information, as you would hope, since they're required to do it, and it's important for our justice system that they do it. So they have a policy, and they did respond to me with these disclosure letters that they will send out to defense attorneys. And for some of the police officers, it's just a template. So they only have one copy, which means that, after that police officer got charged with a crime or whatever, they, at least up to the point I had made my request, they had never, brought that officer in to testify. But I found in other cases, sometimes they would be bringing these police officers in to work on a lot of different cases. Like I found two of them that jumped out at me were they were both in Northampton. So one officer, and again, I don't know the names of these officers because they didn't want me to have that information, but one Northampton officer, the police department found that he was responsible for domestic violence and for untruthfulness related to this alleged domestic violence in 2015. And so between 2021 and January 2022, so this is not cases that were like open at the time that this officer was found responsible for domestic violence. This is like 6 years later. He was information about him was disclosed in 22 criminal cases. So they having this officer, working with them basically constantly, in 1 year, 22 cases. And another Northampton officer, in May 2018, he received a continuation without a finding for drunk driving and leaving the scene of property damage. And continued without a finding is like basically when you sort of plead guilty without admitting your guilt. It's like you acknowledge that there's enough evidence to convict you without like officially getting a guilty plea on your criminal record. But this officer was placed on probation for a year. And in 2021, so this is a few years later, the officer's information was disclosed in 33 criminal cases. And there was also I believe there was a 34th one where there was no date. So I wasn't sure exactly when it happened, but I assume it was around the same time. So we're talking in some cases, officers have, not just allegedly done things, but an investigation found that they had done something, and they either were found responsible or they pleaded for a continuation without a finding, and then they're bringing them in for like more than 20, more than 30 cases in 1 year. And in my opinion, we as the public deserve to know who these officers are. And, it's one thing to say, okay, we have this information and we're disclosing it. We deserve to know who those officers are. And, so that we can, as a public, have a more informed conversation about whether it's appropriate for these officers to continue testifying in criminal cases. We had talked about the Brady stuff I believe, previously, and we had talked about I think another officer out in Western Mass who was on the Berkshire County Brady list, and somebody asked me after reading that, like, if this guy is on a Brady list, like, how is he still allowed to be a police officer?
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing is, like, when you're on a Brady list, that doesn't it doesn't prevent you from being a police officer. It's just a question of like what happens when this officer goes into court to testify. But I think that like the public deserves to have a conversation about like, okay, but if an officer can't like testify, or rather, if an officer, when he goes in to testify, the DA's office can't really vouch for that officer and say that they think this is a person with credibility, you know, does should that person be a police officer? I mean, you know, like if whenever they go into court, we have to be like, okay, but by the way, this guy was responsible for domestic violence and for trying to like mislead the investigation by being untruthful. Should that person be a police officer? And you know, shouldn't the public know if that person is a police officer? Shouldn't the public know who that person is?
I think that they should. And I want to say, because I haven't
I
said
mean,
it
so
yet.
do I. That's why I'm doing this, right? But
No, exactly. And I want to say congratulations, because I know that and just for the audience to like understand. So like I know that you've asked every DA, like you just said, in the state for the Brady list, but specifically, I guess just for the audience to know, like, what exact records was it, only that you requested from the Northwestern DA? And you've said it kind of why, but you feel that we all should kind of have that access. And I just wonder, was it anything beyond the Brady list, or is he just not wanting to have that out at all?
So I asked for the Brady list, which they said they do not have. The other things I asked for were, I believe I asked for the disclosures that were sent out to the defendants, which is what I had been provided with by Northwestern. I had asked for, hold on, I'm going to look up the like exact language of the request I sent out really quick. The hold on, here we go. Okay, I had asked for the disclosures that have been made. I had asked for communications with the defendants, which I guess, you know, in this case ended up sort of being the same thing. And I asked for communications with the police departments about it, and I believe they did not indicate that they had anything, any communications with the police departments in writing. So, but they did send me, I believe it was like 190, 191 of these disclosure letters, many of which were like duplicates because they were copies that had been sent out to defendants. And there were over 30. Well, I guess you know, technically I don't know for certain, but I believe there are approximately 30 officers. I think they only had one disclosure letter per officer. And in some cases, it appeared that there were officers who had worked for like two different police departments. And I'm like 99.9% sure that they're the same officer. So I didn't count those twice. But there were like just over like 30 police officers
So is
belief.
this the only DA in the state so far that has refused to give you the list unredacted?
No. So I unfortunately I can't right now get into the details of every single response. I mean, first of all, there's like a whole bunch of them. There's like I think 11 DAs in the plus the Attorney General's office. So we'd be like talking forever if I had to go into the details of everyone. But and there's like a few of them.
It's me being curious.
There's a few of them. There's sort of like an ongoing thing here that I don't really want to get into today. But I can give like a one example. Is the Middlesex DA's office was much more open than most of them. Like they have a fairly extensive list of police officers. I mean, like I don't quote me, but I want to say it was like more than 100 or 200 officers that they had listed. And they basically have like all the disclosure letters ready to send out to people. You know, they generally, I would say, are better than the other agencies. Another example, actually, the Middlesex DA they redacted the docket numbers, which is something we're going to get into with the Northwestern DA's office. I think these were docket numbers about people who the officers were testifying in. I don't think they were docket numbers related to criminal charges against the officers. So I wasn't like, I didn't think that was right when they redacted them, but I wasn't like, trying to start a lawsuit about it at the time. But another example would be the Essex DA's office. They did the same thing that Northwestern did, which is they redacted the names of the officers and they redacted docket numbers of criminal charges against the officers. And just real quick, a docket number is like an ID number that a court assigns to a court case so that they can, keep track of everything. And it's very helpful to be able to access docket numbers if you're a journalist, because, whenever you ask the court, for information, they're like, what's the docket number? So sometimes you can find information without them, but it's extremely helpful to have them. So the Essex DA redacted the docket numbers and the names. And in that case, I appealed to the supervisor of records. And the supervisor of records said, no, you can't redact any of this information. So they were like, okay, we'll give you the names, but we still think the docket numbers are protected. So I appeal again. And the supervisor is like, no, really, the docket numbers, they're not protected. So they relented and they gave me the docket numbers. Whereas Northwestern, I have filed 3 appeals related to Northwestern, and in each and every case, the supervisor of public records, which for people who don't know, we've talked about this in past episodes, is like it's like our state's watchdog for public records. It's someone who's appointed by the Secretary of the Commonwealth, who it currently is Bill Galvin. At the time, the supervisor of records was an attorney named Rebecca Murray, who I believe still works for the Secretary of the State of the Commonwealth, but it was like promoted to a different job. But at the time, she was the secretary, and she ruled 3 times that none of this information is protected. And in each case, the DA just like doubled down and was like, we're not going to release any of this information. So, what happened was, they denied my initial request, and then they responded to 3 separate appeals saying that they weren't going to comply. And then, finally, what happened was I asked the supervisor of records, I believe, to refer this to the Attorney General's office. There's like a weird quirk with how our system of public records enforcement works, which is that the supervisor of records, despite being like the official who's tasked with upholding the public records law, can't enforce any of her decisions in court. So if someone says we don't agree with your interpretation of the law, what she has to do is tell the Attorney General, hey, this person's violating the public records law. Can you, look into it and maybe get back to us about what you're going to do with that? And then the Attorney General can enforce the law in court. She can sue, public officials. But there's like a real problem that, we talked about this in past episodes, but the short of it is like the Attorney General, first of all, the Attorney General is a prosecutor, and keeping some of this information secret. Problem, I think, is that the Attorney General is responsible for defending state agencies in court. So like you're saying that the person who would sue a state agency is also the person who, defends state agencies, sometimes even against public records lawsuits. And in fact, I believe because the DAs are considered like state level, my attorney has to serve a copy of our lawsuit to the Attorney General's office in case the Attorney General's office jumps in and defends the DA's office. So that's the person you're asking to be responsible for enforcing the public records law. But in any case, the supervisor didn't even get around to referring this to the AG's office, which is not uncommon. I think there's an issue where the supervisor doesn't really like to rely on the Attorney General, which I don't know if we need to get into all the reasons why that might be, but I think there's just an issue with feeling like maybe the Attorney General doesn't back up the mission of the supervisor as much as we might hope that she would. But in any case, that didn't happen. So, at some point I started looking for a lawyer, and we said, when I finally got a lawyer who was working on this case with me, we sent what's called a demand letter to the DA's office, which is basically like saying, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to sue you. And my lawyer said, hey, we'd really like to save the taxpayers some money by not having this, you make these like frivolous arguments to defend against this lawsuit. So why don't you just give us the records? And they refused to do so. So, that's number 5. They refused for the 5th time to produce these records. And, here we are.
Yeah, so I guess can we talk about together about like why it's such an issue that they will give you some 190 pages where it's like problematic 30 officers, but it's all redacted. Like you'd never be able to know who these officers are, and why is that an issue?
Because we like deserve to know who these police
I completely
officers
agree.
are.
I completely agree.
Like, again, it's good that they didn't just say these records are completely protected and we're not going to give you anything, but we deserve to have the whole story. Like, who are these officers? And maybe we'd find out if we looked into it that there's other information about these officers that isn't being disclosed to people. If we knew who they were. And I just don't think it's reasonable, and I also just don't think that the arguments they're making are valid. And the 2 arguments they use are these 2. One is an exemption to the public records law. It's exemption C, which is the privacy exemption, and then the other is the criminal offender record information, or CORI law. And so I'll go through them one by one. So the exemption C, or we'll call it the privacy exemption, is it's supposed to keep information that would like damage people's reputations, and there isn't like it's private information that there just isn't like a valid reason for it to come out. I mean, what it says in the exemption is personnel or medical files. So personnel stuff would be, like work related, like maybe an employee evaluation or something. Medical files would be, somebody's medical information if they got like sick or injured or whatever, or they had to see a doctor. And it says, or information and any other materials or data relating to a specifically named individual, the disclosure of which may constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So that is kind of vague, but it's like it's got to be something that implicates someone's personal privacy. It can't just be like anything. But like there's a couple big caveats to this, though. First of all, this is a 20-year-old decision. It was when the Worcester Telegram and Gazette sued the city of Worcester for withholding internal affairs records about police officers. The city had argued that they were personnel records, which is, one of the types of records that this exemption applies to. And the appeals court, this has never been overturned. It decided that, well, an internal investigation is not the same thing as like an employee evaluation. It's not a personnel record. The sort of internal affairs process at police departments exists for a different purpose than an employee evaluation. The purpose of it is so that the public knows that these guys, because they're generally guys, I suppose some of them are women, but who go around with guns and they can lock people in cages and they can get criminal charges filed against them. We got to make sure that they are trustworthy, and you can't keep that information secret and then claim that the process is trustworthy, so that you have to release that information. And I don't think you can really argue with that. And just to be clear, some of these disclosure letters, they are less information than you would get in one of these internal investigations. Like this, they have the name of the officer, they have like some dates and what they're accused of doing, but no sort of like narrative detail. So this is something that you could cross-reference with the internal affairs records, but they have less information. So to say that an internal affairs investigation is not something that you can keep from the public, but a sort of letter that just summarizes some of the information about that investigation is something you can keep private. I don't think that makes any sense. And then sort of the other big caveat to this, which I think is probably even makes this argument even more ridiculous, is that in 2022, our state legislature passed this like sort of comprehensive police reform law. This is, if you've heard of the Peace Officer Standards and Training or Post Commission that is supposed to like be responsible for credentialing police officers, that is the law that created the Post Commission. But this law did a lot of changes and lots of little tweaks, and one of them was this privacy exemption. It added some language to it that says this subclause, which, you know, this exemption shall not apply to records related to a law enforcement misconduct investigation. So, I mean, you don't get any more clear than that. It doesn't apply to an investigation of law enforcement misconduct. And it doesn't say internal affairs records. It says law enforcement misconduct, which I think is more broader and would encompass not just an internal affairs investigation, but a criminal investigation or some other type of misconduct investigation, like the post commission investigations. The DA's office is basically saying that, well, they changed the language in this law and now nobody knows what it means. So it must mean that we can redact their names, which is just completely nonsensical. Like, how would saying that this exemption doesn't apply to a police misconduct investigation create, like, how would it expand the investigation to encompass more information about police misconduct investigations? That doesn't make any sense.
We've spoken about the Post Commission multiple times on the show, and if anybody's listening, this is a good time to go back and listen to the Laura Saylor episodes, because Post is nothing Andrew is talking about the cases he's referring to, the officers he's referring to. He's talking about the other side of the state and the same issues Laura was highlighting in Eastern Mass with the Stoughton police and Sandra Birchmore. So everything is it's all the same. Doesn't matter where you're on the state. But just if anybody's curious about Post, we talk about it in other episodes.
So the other thing that they were citing, I had mentioned, is the it's called the Quarry statute, and this is a law that is sort of designed to protect information about people's criminal records, but it's not like, it doesn't protect all information. It's supposed to. I think the idea is that, like, you don't want anybody just being able to go up and look up someone's complete criminal record, because people do deserve to have some privacy. And, I'm certainly sympathetic to that. I don't think that if somebody has a criminal conviction, it should be, necessarily it shouldn't necessarily follow them around for their entire life. I understand that, but it doesn't just automatically make it so that any information about, like, someone being charged with a crime, it should be kept secret. And, I think we need to be careful about how, like, even though there are legitimate reasons that I sympathize with for keeping some of this information, private, we've got to be careful about, sort of our good intentions leading to bad outcomes. Like, another example would be, like, a few years ago, they had passed this law saying that, like, police reports about domestic violence should not be released because of the potential impact on victims. And then I can't remember if it was, I think it was this year, WBUR had published this whole expose about how this was leading to police officers basically being accused of domestic violence, and it would not be made public, and we've got to be careful about, how, when we pass laws, that just because there's a good reason for keeping some information private, it doesn't mean that we should allow that to lead to cases where information that shouldn't be private is kept private. But in any case, the argument the DA is making is that the names of the officers who have been charged with crimes and also these docket numbers I mentioned are protected by Corey. And I don't think that is the case. I mean, there was actually a case a few years ago where I believe it was the Boston Globe had filed a lawsuit that was dealing with arrest reports of police officers who had been charged with drunk driving. And, you know, the police departments were making the same argument that it's criminal offender record information. And the courts said that is not, you know, that's not correct. You can't withhold these police reports. And once again, I should point out that these disclosure letters that the DA is redacting have less information in them than a police report. You know, they tell you what like charges were filed against the officer, but there's no narrative detail. It doesn't have, you know, all of the detail you would find in a police report. So if you can get a police report, I don't see why you can't get a letter that has just a fraction of the information that's in the police report. That doesn't make any sense. And I guess I should just mention, by the way, people might be wondering, like, why seek out these records if you can get a police report or you can get an internal affairs investigation? And there's a couple reasons for that. So one is just like a police department, or rather a DA, it works with lots of police departments. So you can go to each and every police department and file a public records request with them. And then, you know, they might try to fight you on it. You might have to file appeals and stuff for each one of them. And it could be a really drawn out process. But you could also just go to the DA and say, hey, give me the list of all the officers, you know, who you have made these disclosures about. And you could get information about a whole bunch of different police departments all at once. And, you know, as a journalist who has a limited amount of time, you know, I'm only human. I exist in the physical world. I have to obey the laws of physics. It's really helpful to be able to just go to one source and get a whole bunch of information from that one source and to not have to go to however many police departments there are. And then the other thing is, like, it gives you sort of a jumping off point. Like, I might not know necessarily which officers should I be asking about, you know, or I might have to, you know, in some cases you might make a request and say like, okay, give me all of the officers who've been accused of drunk driving. But then if there's like a whole bunch of them, then, you know, they might try to charge you fees and say that you're asking for too many records. And it's really helpful to be able to get like a bird's eye view. So even if I'm not getting a complete police report about all of these officers, I might have one of these disclosure letters that jumps out at me and say, hey, I better go and follow up on this and find out more about this officer and more details about this incident. And so, and I mean, and then the other probably third thing I would say is just, it's the principle of the thing. You know, you shouldn't have to go and ask all the other police departments. Like, even if you can, you shouldn't have to, because the DA is just as responsible for following the public records law as the police departments are. So even if I can go and jump through a bunch of other hoops to find out some of this information, I shouldn't have to, and no one else should have to either. And you know, I think that's enough of a reason on its own, to be honest.
I do too. I think that's enough on its own. And I didn't think of that. So that's one of the things I guess I would have asked you. It definitely makes sense because it's such a bird's eye view. And just for the listeners, this DA is the DA that would oversee like not knowledge or information for Greenfield and Northampton. And I'm only naming Greenfield specifically because they're having so many issues there with different officers who there are multiple episodes we've talked about them. I just think it's interesting. Like, again, people look at our DA in this area as being a more progressive DA. And I think it's interesting that although he's considered a more progressive DA, he still won't give up information that I agree with you, Andrew, and clearly a lawyer agrees, so I don't even need to, that you'd think would should be given to the public. And I know we talked about it, and you've mentioned that they didn't, you made these appeals and they would say no and say no. So you got your lawyer, but it looks like they only gave you basically a statement when you, and I don't even think it was to, it was to the Hampshire Gazette, if I'm correct.
Yeah, we can read the statement, but just to get a sense of how petty this DA is being, they sent this statement to, the first place I saw it published was in the Daily Hampshire Gazette, and I believe subsequently some other places that had published stories updated those stories with quotes from the statement. But they had sent this. This was last Tuesday, the day after I filed the lawsuit. That I filed the lawsuit on June 12th. I don't know when this episode's coming out, but it was June 12th, and then the statement was sent out on the 13th. And so the day I had filed the lawsuit, I reached out to the DA's office, their communications person, their press secretary, whatever the official title is. And I just said, hey, do you want to give me a statement about this lawsuit for me to include in my story? And their first assistant district attorney, Steve Gagney. So first assistant district attorney would be like the right-hand person of the DA, the second in command. He reaches out to my lawyer and he says, it's come to my attention that your client is, contacting us, and since he's being represented by a lawyer, we feel it wouldn't be appropriate for us to speak with him directly, and all communication will have to take place through you, through my lawyer. And so, first of all, that's not true. So generally, when you're involved in some issue where you're represented by an attorney, the attorneys who are representing the other party should not be talking with you directly. They should be talking with your attorney. But I reached out again to the communications person. This is a person who's literally, her job is to respond to the media. I'm not even 100% sure that she is a lawyer. I don't think she is. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but I don't think she's a lawyer. And as far as I know, she's not representing them in this lawsuit. And there's no reason ethically why she couldn't respond to me. But in any case, my lawyer responds and says, okay, well, would you like to provide a statement like he asked? And so it was on Thursday, and this was again 2 days after they had sent the statement to the Daily Hampshire Gazette and possibly to some other places. They just sent me this Steve Gagney sent a email to my lawyer just saying, we don't have a statement for your client, which is yeah, you do. You just don't want to send it to me because you're being petty. You're being petty. You literally have a statement. You just don't want to send it to me. But in any case, I did get a copy of it from the Daily Hampshire Gazette, so we can go through it.
Yes, we can go through it if you like. But that's wild.
I mean, I don't know that most publications would share details like that, but I just people should hear stuff like that. It's so petty, and that's I just want to be clear. When this DA, his goal here is to prevent the public from getting access to information that he believes that, they don't deserve to have. And so he's going to, provide a statement to try to make himself look good to other media. But when I asked, they're going to be disrespectful and rude and basically be like, you're the guy suing us. You're the guy who actually wants people to have this information, who's doing something about it. So we're not going to send you the statement. And, to be perfectly honest, I don't even care that much. I'm not offended or anything. I feel like it's worth sharing that just to show the pettiness. And it doesn't matter to me what they say. I already have, all their responses to my public records request. I know what they're arguing. I know how silly it is. I don't need them. But, just as a journalist, I think it's generally is your sort of ethical duty as a journalist to reach out to the people you write about, particularly if you are publishing something, negative about them, it's worth, giving them the opportunity to share their side of the story. And so I did that. And, instead of trying to share their side of the story, they decided to be petty. So whatever, that's on them, not me, but whatever.
So the kids playing at home, just so you know, this is we're all elder millennials here. This journalist suing the government for information on a legitimate basis with really flimsy argument. Then when that journalist reaches out, also, like you said, to give an offer, do you have a comment on this? It's public that I'm suing you, or and the fact that they went to another, they subtweeted you. This is pre-internet subtweet, right? So those playing at home back in the day, this is how you used to play games in the prosecutors and everybody would play games with the media. It's the equivalent of screenshotting something instead of actually tagging or quote tweeting them.
Yeah, and just remember, they wanted me to have these communications through my lawyer, and obviously what is going on is they want to create 2 extra steps anytime we communicate. So instead of me just talking to the communications person and her sending me information, they want me to talk to my lawyer, and then for my lawyer to forward that communication to them, and then for them to send it to my lawyer, who has to forward it to me, because of course they're never going to CC me on any of these emails, because it's another petty thing that they're doing. They can't even CC me on an email that they know I'm going to end up reading anyway. They just want to create more work for me and my lawyer, because ultimately that's what this is all about. This isn't really about providing a legitimate legal argument. What this is about is creating more work, because these agencies know that the more work they create for you to get access to this information, the less time you have to do actual reporting about the substantive, the substance of the issue. So instead of, like, I have lots of other projects I'm working on right now that I think are, equally, if not maybe more important than this. But, because I think this is important, I've, putting a lot of work into this. And I should say that, like, it isn't just like that I handed this off to my lawyer and then he's taking care of everything. Like, I have been fairly involved in this process. Like, I've been reading the complaint, multiple times and making suggestions for things to add or change. And, I've been giving him my input on sort of what our legal strategy is going to be, trying to create work for journalists, because
persistence.
the more, like this, the more work they create for you, then the less reporting you can do. And as people may be aware, we've had tons of downsizing in the media industry, in the last decade or more. I don't know, like for a long time, we've had newspapers shutting down. We've had newspapers laying off tons of workers or offering them buyouts and then just not replacing them with anybody. We've had them sort of collapse these local papers from different communities into sort of one regional paper that can barely, keep up with any of the local news. And so that's bad enough. But then when you've got government officials on top of it who are going to put up all these roadblocks, it's like, how are people supposed to cover the news and give, the communities the important information that matters to them? And I think that's just sad. It's really sad. And it's also unethical that a DA would be doing that, again, using taxpayer money to do all this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And
using taxpayer money to keep the taxpayers uninformed and ignorant about things going on in their communities. I mean, that's the definition of unethical right there.
I was going to say that's like the definition. Yeah. And it's horrible because, like I mentioned earlier, in this area, there are things that I think anywhere in the state, and I think transparency is important, because you're saying, our tax dollars fund these individuals' departments, their salaries, like everything about it. And as a state employee myself, like, I mean, there are lots of things that people could find out about my position even. So that's fine. I think when the tax dollars are involved and they're going to be spending our money on that, I don't know how anyone could really disagree with you at all, because it's really shocking to me personally that, like, I just don't know, like, if there's a public records law and it's supposed to be upheld, I understand why police officers or the DI may not want to give you certain information because it may be damning. But it's such a shoddy argument in my opinion from what I've been reading. And if it's okay, if you want, we could go over the statement the DA sent you, like kind of maybe paragraph by paragraph. It's not too long, but I wondered if you'd be okay with that.
Yeah, sure. I was just taking another peek at it. I don't know that we need to read like the whole first paragraph. The first paragraph, they're just saying, they have a Brady protocol. They tell defense attorneys, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, we know that. But
Right.
go ahead. Yeah, if one of you wants to like read that, go for it.
Sure. So I'll read it quickly and then we can talk about it. But the Northwestern District's Attorney's Office sent this to the Daily Hampshire Gazette, and they say that they take seriously its legal and ethical responsibilities to provide criminal defendants with information that may be favorable to their defense. Toward that end, the office has developed a Brady protocol in which prosecutors inform defense attorneys of any criminal wrongdoing or other alleged misconduct committed by law enforcement officers who are witnesses in pending criminal prosecution. This ensures that defendants' rights are protected and justice is served in every case. However, the office equally believes the law enforcement officers do not forfeit their rights to privacy by virtue of their profession. Criminal offender record information, or CORI, and internal personnel files often contain highly sensitive and confidential information that is not appropriate for public dissemination. Regardless of whose information is being sought, our office routinely withholds or redacts records to guard against invasions of privacy, public embarrassment, and reputational damage. We do not afford law enforcement officers any special privilege in this regard. In our view, the combination of recent amendments to the Public Record Statute, the creation of the Post Police Officer Standards and Training Commission, and developments in appellate case law have created much uncertainty about the current state of public records in Massachusetts. We would welcome guidance from the Attorney General's office, the legislature, and/or judiciary regarding whether our interpretation of the public record statute is correct. Beyond that, we cannot comment on the specifics of any pending litigation. So
It's really hard for me not to vomit during that whole.
yes, I kind of, went as quickly as I could so we could all stomach it. Okay. But yeah, wow, Andrew.
Yeah, I guess the main takeaway from that was in the second paragraph where they say they're not providing any special treatment to the police.
Absolutely.
And it's demonstrably untrue. I mean, it's just false. It's not true. So like you can literally right now go on to the Northwestern DA's website and you might have to like scroll down, but they have like press releases, and a lot of these press releases are like so-and-so, is facing criminal charges or was just convicted or was just sentenced. And yeah, they always have the person's name. Like they never just say some dude was convicted of, indecent assault on a child. It has the person's name. And in fact, in one of the most recent press releases I was looking at, it was about someone who had like allegedly made threats against a school. It had his name, his age, and it even had the street where he lived. Like, you can't tell me that you're going to release that about, Joe Schmo who makes the threat against a school, but a police officer who's accused of a crime, if you're going to hide his name and somehow that's not special treatment, that's just not true. Like, you can't say that you're not giving special treatment when it's just demonstrably true that you are.
Yeah, like if both a police officer and I are alleged of a crime under this DA, my information would be given out, but a police officer's wouldn't, and that's not considered special treatment.
Yeah, and not only that, but this is not only that, but this is a press release. So they're not only is it like that they're giving it out in response to a public records request, they're
just putting it out there.
They're proactively putting it on the internet for anyone to see and hope, and they're doing it in the hopes that the media will write news articles about it and put that person's name in the paper.
Which could cause public embarrassment and all of the things that they mentioned they don't want to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree with you, Andrew, that when they're putting it out there, it's basically like they are absolutely 100% giving special treatment to the police officers.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if that's what they want the public to believe when it's just not true, I mean, it goes to show that they don't really have a legitimate argument. They just don't want the names of the police officers out there, whether it's because they're worried about the embarrassment or whatever. But it's not a good argument,
So all this happened. You had the 5, kind of with the lawyer demand. The 5th one is when you start filing. I wondered, how hard was it for you to find a lawyer to represent you?
The thing about the public records law is you can get your attorney's fees awarded at the end of a case. So, like, your lawyer can say upfront, like, I'm not going to charge you any money. But then at the end, what I can do is, like, if we win, I can ask the judge to order the other side, in this case, the DA's office, to pay my attorney's fees. Um, but like, you know, that's not, it's certainly nice, but it's not like a great incentive because, you know, most people, lawyers included, like to get paid up front. They don't want to, like a lawsuit can potentially, it's at least going to drag out for months, but quite possibly for years. And to say, I'm going to agree to represent you throughout this potentially very lengthy process, and not sure whether I'm going to get paid or not. And even if I am, it's not going to happen until the end of it. Uh, not a great incentive. I mean, I
Yeah.
think most people don't like to work in the hopes that they will get paid, maybe possibly someday. They like to get paid, now. And who can blame them?
Right.
But and also, like, the judge is going to be, you know, scrutinizing your hours. Like, it's not just like, the judge is going to be like, well, do you really deserve to be paid for this particular part of, what you did? Maybe we shouldn't give you fees for that part. Those hours, we'll just strike that. And or, I think you're charging too much. I think I'll cut your rate down. And particularly for a really skilled attorney who charges, uh, a lot of money for their services, they're going to get probably a reduced rate compared to what they would normally charge a paying client. So, like, this is just not a great incentive. And I mean, it's like, uh it, it's gonna, probably more of an incentive than nothing, but it's not changing fundamentally the fact that a public records lawsuit, when an attorney does it, it's more of like a public service that they're doing, and not something that they're trying to get rich on. So,
Hmm.
and just to be clear, like, something like a civil rights case, the way lawyers get paid in those is, like, you can get like these massive awards of, like, hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in, like, punitive damages, and then the lawyer takes a cut of that. That
Hmm.
is not how it works in public records. Like, in public records, you get the records at the end of it, and then the attorney's fees are like a separate issue. There's no way to be like, okay, you owe me, like, $1 million for withholding all these records, and then my lawyer gets,
Caught.
33,
Yeah.
gets, like, a third of it or half of it or whatever. That's not how it works. It's the lawyer's going to put in their hours, the judge is going to look at it and say how reasonable it is and how reasonable the rate is, and then they're gonna give them some amount at the end, which they can't even foresee what it is, so they don't know how much they're getting paid. That means that, it's not like, say, personal injury. There's, you've seen those, like, Morgan and Morgan commercials on TV like every 5 minutes. Like, it's not like that.
And you're right though, because I've personally had a personal injury lawyer though, and it is like it's like 30, it's like 30%. And so I wasn't concerned necessarily about the fees because I knew where I stood. But in your case, I've been in civil court too, and I've had what you're saying, like that representation. I've had like community legal aid represent me in the past when I needed someone for housing law. And I remember, like, I was so impressed that the lawyer was willing to do it because, like you said, um in the end, it's a matter of if he wins, if he gets those fees.
But in, like, the public records case, there aren't that many lawyers there. I don't know that there are many lawyers who, like, specialize in it, certainly.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So I wonder how you found your lawyer actually.
But, like, even not just like that, there aren't that many lawyers who specialize in it, but it's hard to even find a lawyer for it, period. Even if they're someone who is, skilled in litigation and is capable of doing the legal research necessary to bring one of these lawsuits, there just aren't that many people willing to do it because it's not going to get them paid. Basically, the way I did it was, I just started calling around people I know who have done these kinds of lawsuits in the past, and I asked them. I probably went through the list of every single person I knew anytime somebody, I remember like there was literally once there was like a full day where I spent like the whole day just like, calling people out of the blue and being like, hey, you want to help me out here? And anytime somebody gave me the name of another lawyer, I would call them up, and I, I couldn't. Eventually, someone referred me to this large law firm that takes pro bono cases sometimes, and this firm, I don't want to, potentially burn any bridges. I'm not going to name them, and I'm not trying to shame them either, to be honest. But I, they agreed to represent me, and I had a fairly young attorney assigned case, who, she was doing the work, like she was doing the research, she was trying to figure out how to file one of these lawsuits. But as what you might imagine often happens with young lawyers is, she found a better job. I think she got some kind of clerkship on a court, and I can't begrudge her for accepting a good job and trying to advance in her career. But then, her supervisor, I believe, was dealing with some kind of long-term family issue, and so I got assigned a new lawyer who was older and more experienced than the original lawyer, but he was also very busy with his regular workload, so he couldn't help me. And then he was saying there was another lawyer that they were going to try to assign, but then he, I think, was like sick or was on, medical leave or something. Uh, and it got to the point where I was like, you guys don't have the bandwidth for this, do you? And he said, I think you're probably right. I think it's maybe beneficial if we part ways. And I wasn't like mad at them necessarily, but it was clear that a lot of these big law firms, I think they take in so much money that they will have like a pro bono practice on the side, as sort of like a public service. Maybe it's their way of like assuaging their guilty consciences, because these big law firms, are representing corporate clients all the time. They want to represent people in sort of public interest cases every once in a while to give back to the community. Uh, in any case, but in any case, I think maybe this isn't true of every large law firm, but it kind of seemed like I was their lowest priority, and
Okay.
that was, it was just, it was, I wasn't like mad, but I was really disappointed. It was like,
That
I,
makes
because
sense. That's a lot of
yeah,
time.
I mean,
So
like
much time.
I invested my time in, meeting with these people and putting my trust in them that they were gonna assist me with this, and it just didn't work out. And I mean, that happens in life sometimes, but it was still very disappointing. And but in any case, I was having a conversation about public records with someone from the RCFP. What does that stand for? The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And he was like, oh, you're having all these problems with public records. I don't think I can help you out, but let me give you the name of this attorney who is at Harvard Law School. His name is Mason Courts. And so I had a conversation with Mason, and we kind of hit it off. He seemed to get where I was coming from right away. And he said, like, I can't make any promises, but I'm going to talk to some people and I'll see what I can do. And then he got back to me pretty quickly and said, okay, I think let's do it. Let's take this case. Um, and I have gotten the complete opposite feeling from Mason, whereas like this large law firm, I it was I felt like I was their lowest priority. And I had this attorney who was definitely trying to do the work, but I didn't really feel sort of the energy. But with Mason, I've gotten the sense that he is really motivated to do this. And we've been in, consistently in contact with each other. We've been, talking through issues together, and sort of coming up with our strategy together. And I've really it's felt like a very collaborative process. And but the other thing I should say is that Mason is not sort of doing this on his own. He works at he's a clinical instructor at the Harvard Law School Cyber Law Clinic. And so a law clinic, for people who are not familiar, is when you'll have an attorney who's overseeing the clinic, or several attorneys who are overseeing the clinic, and then you will have law students who take the clinic for credit as part of their, trying to get a law degree. And the attorney will take on like actual clients with actual cases. It's not like a mock trial, it's a real thing. In some cases they're taking on like criminal cases, like they're defending people in court. uh Believe it or not, if you are wrongfully convicted in Massachusetts, uh one group that will work on your case is a law clinic.
Oh, okay. I
Believe it
didn't
or
know
not,
that.
this is a tangent, but sorry, this is something I've been working on, is that like wrongfully convicted people, uh, once you're entitled to a lawyer, once you are in court on criminal charges, and you also get to, you're entitled to a lawyer for your appeal. Once you're convicted, you can try to challenge your conviction by filing a motion for a new trial and arguing that you didn't get a fair trial, or that there's evidence that you are innocent. And but you're not entitled to a lawyer to do that. So the state public defender's office does have a program that represents wrongfully convicted people, but they have limited resources. So you may have to turn to the Boston College Innocence Program, where students will be helping to do a lot of the work on your case. So law clinics, they are an important part of the our sort of legal framework in this country. They sort of step in a lot of places where the system is kind of failing people. And you know maybe that's in some case, in some sense, that's like kind of a sad commentary on our legal system, that we need students to do some of this work. But I mean, it's also it's good in a way too, that students can get like real world experience. And I don't mean, when I say that it's a sad commentary, I don't want to suggest that I am devaluing the work of the students who have worked on this with us, because they were helpful, certainly. And I do appreciate the work that they did. And I just really quickly want to give a shout out to the two students who helped Mason and I in the sort of early stages. They are Vincent Roble and Carolina Rabinowitz. Um, they helped with sort of drafting our initial legal strategy, and they helped Mason with sort of the rough draft of the complaint. Um, and unfortunately, I don't know for sure that I would have been able to bring this lawsuit if it wasn't for law clinics existing. So I am grateful to them for the work that they did. And just wanted people to be aware that law clinics play such an important role, and that they're for anyone out there who's trying to find representation, and not necessarily a public records lawsuit, but in any sort of one of these areas of our system where people are have limited access to legal representation. There might be a law clinic out there, and you should look into that and see if somebody can help you.
Yeah, that is super helpful information, Andrew. I was aware that once you're convicted, you'd have to obviously have the funds to lawyer up. But I actually didn't know that the law clinic. I didn't think about the law clinic aspect of it, and that is so important. So I can even share a link to the law clinic.
Oh yeah, and just to jump back to my point about the Boston College Innocence Program, like some of the cases, this is I can't remember exactly when it started, but it's only been around for a few years, and they have gotten people out of prison and exonerated them. And obviously there are like very talented lawyers behind this work.
Right.
Actual lawyers who have passed the bar and are practicing attorneys, but they got help from students. Like those students helped get people out of prison. So that is the power of law clinics that people need to be aware of.
Yes, I completely agree. And I know what you mean about the dark side of it, is that we should actually all have access to and hopefully will someday representation. But it's wonderful that these students and that these law clinics exist. I completely agree. And thank you to both students for sure that helped you out.
Yeah, and I
That's
should just
amazing.
also mention that just going forward, those two students are not working anymore on this. One of them actually graduated. That was Carolina. So congrats to her for
Congrats.
graduating.
Yeah.
Good luck with the bar exam if you're listening to this. And then I think Vincent's got another year of law school, but we're going to have, in the next semester, we'll have other students helping us out, and, they'll continue to play an important role in our lawsuit, and looking forward to working with them.
That's fantastic. Where I would end up now, Andrew, is why, like this case for me, it's why do we need a stronger public records law? I thought we had one, but it sounds like we don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this case, that is what it shows, that we need a stronger public records law. And as I mentioned, I don't think, I think the law is clearly on our side. And I think that there have been other lawsuits that have already established this. Like I mentioned, there was the 2003 Worcester case, but with the Telegram and Gazette. And then, I mentioned that there was the case about the police reports of the officers accused of drunk driving that I believe was the Boston Globe. And hold on, I think it was the Boston Globe. I just wanted to make sure I got that correct. But what happens is these law enforcement agencies are basically, they don't want this information to get out, and they are just coming up with new reasons, or in some cases they're not even new reasons. It's just the same reason, like saying that they're personnel records, even though that's already been rejected. They're and the reason they're doing this is because they know that what I've been comparing this to is it's like a sort of it's like a casino where the house always wins. Like they're taking a gamble because they know that probably more than 99% of people who get rejected for public records are not going to file a lawsuit. So if nobody files a lawsuit, then they just don't have to release the records, right? And we talked earlier about the supervisor of public records of the appeals process. And sometimes, as I mentioned, places will release records after the supervisor of records tells them to. But I keep coming back to this analogy that Spencer made one time, that the supervisor of records is like a hall monitor. So like the supervisor of records can be like, hey, that's not the law. Like you have to release this stuff. But the supervisor of records can't really do anything about it. So they can, I said that they have to refer it to the attorney general, but there's all kinds of problems which we have talked about on this podcast before about that process. And it's really, for all intents and purposes, it is just impractical to expect the supervisor of records to send these over to the attorney general, and then for the attorney general to bring lawsuits. And it's actually, the attorney general has only brought 2 public records lawsuits in like the entire history of the public records law. And meanwhile, there are like somewhere between like 2,500 and like 3,000 public records appeals filed every year. And then those public records appeals, probably represent an even larger number of denied requests, because not everybody who's denied a request files an appeal. So we're talking like potentially thousands of times every year people are wrongly denied access to public records. And in the entire history of this law, the attorney general's office has filed 2 lawsuits. Like, give me a break. Like we don't know how many, I don't know how many private lawsuits have been brought under the public records law. There's no like easy way to compile that information, but like it's probably at least a handful every year. I don't know exactly how many, but like every year there are probably more private entities that file public records lawsuits than the attorney general's office has filed in the entire history of the public records law. So that tells you that this system is not functional. And I mean, I just think there's one fairly obvious fix. I don't think this would improve every problem with the public records law, but it would be a good, first step. And I hope lawmakers are taking note that it just doesn't make sense to split this authority between the supervisor of records of the attorney general's office. If the supervisor is the expert on public records and is supposed to be the public's advocate for access to public records, then just let the supervisor file lawsuits. Let the supervisor, and I think that would, instead of being a hall monitor, the supervisor of records is going to be like, if you don't listen to me, there's a chance you're going to get sued. And then people are going to be a lot more likely to listen to the supervisor of records. And when you have a settled legal issue, like whether police misconduct should or should not be public, then the supervisor, they're going to be even more likely to listen to the supervisor. They're going to be like, oh, like, we're going to get, we really are going to get sued because this is already a settled legal issue. Like this, it's a slam dunk case. So I just think that, I have a whole laundry list of things I would change with the public records law, but I think that is one fairly simple thing that would go a long way towards improving access to public records. Because, like, as I mentioned, it was a lot of work for me to find a lawyer, for one thing. And then once I found a lawyer, as I mentioned, I've been involved in the process a lot. So it's been a lot of work that I've had to do. And, as interesting as it's been, and it's been very educational. It's teaching me more about the public records law. I think it's a good experience to have, but at the same time, wouldn't it be better if I was spending my time, actually writing about things instead of like having to fight for the information for, a protracted period just so I can write about it? I think that, I think I know what my answer is. I will say that, like, I have had an interest in filing one of these lawsuits for a long time, but I think that, like, we live in a system of law where some laws are made by the legislatures or regulatory bodies, and some laws are made by courts. We have a common law system where precedent is part of the law. So I've always had this interest in filing one of these lawsuits because I think that that's, like, it's really cool in a sense that a person can go to the courts, and without having to go to any lawmakers, they can say, listen, I want to change the law for the better. And as one person, I want to do this, and to have a system that actually allows people to do that. I think that's really cool. And so I've wanted to, but it's not like I go into every public records request being like, oh man, I hope I get to sue these people. Wouldn't that be great? It's more that I have known that there's problems with the public records law for so long that it has made me want to sort of avail myself of the opportunity to make a change to that law by filing one of these lawsuits. But I certainly, when I filed this request a year and a half ago, I wasn't thinking like, oh wow, I'm going to be suing this guy a year and a half from now. Won't that be fun? So I really wish that we had a system where our state government could step in, particularly when we have an issue of law that's already been settled, and handle it themselves without someone like me needing to invest all this time in it. I don't know that we're going to see that happen anytime soon, but again, lawmakers, take note.
Well, Andrew, thank you for your time and investment in doing this. I personally really appreciate it. I'm sure Spencer's going to say the same thing when he jumps in a second, but I just, I know that the amount of work and all of that, there's no like price you can put on that, but thank you for doing that for the community, and hopefully it will be precedent setting.
Yeah, ditto. Everything Joanna just said, I won't even waste the time. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Andrew for coming on and sharing his Lori, and please come back on. But you also, not only you doing overtime on the legal front, you did overtime this week for the weed out. You actually suggest the ghoulery and tomfoolery. So like, I feel very blessed. Thank you, Andrew. I didn't even have to look. I didn't even have to suggest ghoulery and tomfoolery. Andrew came in ready with it. So this week on ghoulery and tomfoolery, out of this Substack by Bill Shaner. He's a local journalist out of Worcester. His Substack is called Worcester Sucks and I Love It.
Yeah, by the way, if you live in Worcester, work in Worcester, you should be subscribed to this. It's like invaluable. Shout out to Bill.
Yeah, shout out.
Bill, I follow Bill. We follow Bill on all the social media that he's on, and also we get the Substack notifications too. So I actually saw this article as well. I was considering it, but I want to give you credit because you're the one who put it down in writing before I did for tomfoolery. But shout out to Bill Shaner. We will link all this stuff on our website on the episode notes for this episode with Andrew. So this week's ghoulery and tomfoolery from Worcester Sucks and I Love It, Bill Shaner. The headline is, if the cops weren't there, something bad could have happened. And a picture of a police line from the 2020 George Floyd protests that took place in Worcester. So I'm just going to give a quick summary of the intro to this article. So he quotes a publication from the Wall Street Journal. Worcester, Mass. Police Chief Stephen Sargent knelt on the street for close to 9 minutes, head bowed, hands clasped. He wore a sidearm on his hip and a gold badge on his chest. His stomach was in a knot. The chief was surrounded by thousands of protesters gathered in his hometown, the second largest city in New England. The crowd marched down from Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and took a knee in front of the courthouse on June 1st. Posing silently for roughly the same amount of time, George Floyd had been pinned up to the street in Minneapolis by an officer's knee on his neck a week earlier. Damn, Chief Sargent recalled thinking as the minutes passed. That's a long time. He was disgusted at Mr. Floyd's death and told residents and his officer as much. None worthy of the badge thought what happened was right. Bill Shaner comes out of this quote saying, damn. Just a few hours later, Chief Sergeant's officers would threaten to rape a young woman they pinned to the ground. Damn. Fire a barrage of pepper spray bullets at a photojournalist. Damn. Punch a woman in the face and then ask if she's a N-word lover, but with the hard R. Damn. They sicked a police dog on a man, letting it bark and snap inches from his face as two officers pressed him to the pavement with their knees. Damn. They smashed and smashed phones. They smashed they pulled out the, quote, less than lethal weapons. They didn't make distinctions between demonstrators and bystanders. They relished in the violence, bragged about it, taunted those arrested, and then came to file arrest reports. They lied through their teeth. Carelessly, they cut and they pasted. Basically, what he is getting at is that article by the Wall Street Journal did not match their behavior.
You could say that.
Yeah, at all.
And this is because in long story short, if anybody hasn't been paying attention, the Worcester police are under investigation by the DOJ.
Yeah, well, but the other context for this, the reason he's talking about this 2020 protest again, a couple of years later or 3 years later, wow, is because they just a bunch of the people who were wrongfully arrested at this protest filed a class action lawsuit against the police department. So that's on top of the DOJ investigation. And I mean, like, read Bill's piece that summarizes it. I didn't read the entire I read all of Bill's piece. I didn't read the entire lawsuit. I read parts of it, but like just the parts I read, like holy shit, like it's insane. Like it is just like jaw-dropping, just the amount of, this was one night, the amount of stuff that happened in one night with this police department is just it's flabbergasting.
Yeah, it says 44 charges and 14 named officers in the one night.
I suggest everybody listening read what Bill Shaner has to say. He brings the receipts, and the important thing is, this is, to my knowledge, the norm, not the exception. I mean, Minneapolis, the DOJ just finished their consent decree and report on the Minneapolis policing after George Floyd's murder, and it's the same exact shit. It's like, it's just terrorism, in my opinion. So I don't really have much to say. I mean, that's just some ghoulish shit. It's shit we all know they do, but it's just in writing now. So
Yeah, and like, just to be clear, like when we're talking about a lawsuit, a lot of this stuff is backed up by video evidence. It's not just allegations. Like, it is definitely the case. And they had filed, as Bill reports, they had filed charges against tons of people they arrested at this protest. And then they had to drop all the charges later because there was nothing behind any of it. Like, the police were basically just out arresting people for no reason. They were beating people up. They were threatening people with like really disgusting language. They were using like cancer causing like smoke grenades and like these pepper ball things, which for anybody, it was like the World Series, and was it like 2003 or 2004? There was a woman, I feel bad because I'm not remembering her name, but she was killed when a Boston police officer shot her with one of these things. And those are the weapons that the Worcester police were using. And they were apparently like, didn't have like a crowd control plan. They were not supposed to be using a lot of these weapons per their own policies. And I really like the way that Bill juxtaposes it with the police chief, taking a knee and showing solidarity with these protesters who just like a few hours later, they were going to be, beating the shit out of. And like, yeah, again, I don't think I need to add a lot to like Bill's piece. You should just go check it out. Like, it's just.
before we hear your take, man, the same allegations are being made in Portland, Oregon. It's the same pattern of conduct. It's almost like this is just who the police are. So, Joanna, please, I'd love to hear.
Crazy idea you've got there.
Oh, I know.
We'll never catch on.
Well, I agree with both of you, fine people, that this is absurd, and I am so thankful for Bill for reporting on this. Like I am any independent journalist or any journalist who's willing to hope that even though we probably won't get it, that there would be some accountability for people who are terrorizing the public. I think it goes to show you that you should, like, we are not all different. We're more similar than we think, especially when it comes to police departments' budgets growing and growing, and then them still being able to do things like harm the public. I know in Bill's piece, please go read it. It talks about even how the city was like, oh my God, they showed so much restraint. And they were really supported by like the council and some of the administrators. So it's a good read. It's a lot about, things we talk about all the time. And I know Bill wraps it up really talking about what all of us agree with. It's like the money could be spent better on better things. And now this lawsuit and the department settlement fund, which is coming from tax dollars of Worcester, which will likely be in the millions, and I hope so because people were harmed and they deserve to be taken care of. But it's just directly harming everyone. So, Andrew, this is a great piece for us to have focused on.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing I just wanted to point out, which is that Ed Augustus, the former Worcester city manager, he was the head of the city at the time that the police were doing all this stuff. He was Maura Healey's pick for housing secretary. He's part of her cabinet. So people, whether they live in Worcester or not, might be interested to know that their housing secretary was involved in this just like egregious police violence against, like, I think a lot of them were college kids, and like, it's just insane what the police were doing to people. Like, they had like, police dogs that, it's just like, like, I don't know, like, seriously, just go read the whole thing. Like,
Yes, totally read it.
if you like, and if you don't live in Worcester, like, read it. Like, if you, because some of this stuff is not new, but just having it all in one place is incredible. But like, if you don't live in Worcester and don't know anything about it, like, read it. Like, it's, your mind will be blown. Like, it's just completely insane. Like, I think when we had like the police reform debate in 2020, there were people being like, oh, well, that's Minneapolis, Massachusetts is different. But like, okay, in 2023, we've got Boston police cover up for a child molester, who was their union president for 20 years. We've got the Springfield Police Department, DOJ report about systemic violence. Now we've got, this lawsuit and the DOJ investigation of Worcester. So there's our three largest states, and all just absolutely like depraved, violence. And in all three of them, tell me now that we don't have a problem in Massachusetts. Like, if anybody says that, they are just not like a serious person.
They sure aren't. So again, thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you for everything you do. We're going to be following your story, and the lawsuit and all the other stuff you report on. And we give you a shout out every now and then on the show, just so you know. Hopefully people,
Oh, cool.
this is this is what Andrew's doing, this work. It's super important. So please support Andrew's work. Go to his website, and the Mass Dump on Substack. Well, again, we're going to link everything there. So on the website.
It's Andrew Quemere. The publication is The Mass Dump. It's andrewqmr.substack.com, or just Google The Mass Dump. And definitely, like, as I hope you have, one takeaway of this is that it's a lot of work. So please, sign up for a paid subscription to my newsletter, or you can check at the end of the newsletter. There's also a PayPal link. So, please support the work that I'm doing, because, I'm doing it not just because I think it's like, really interesting, but because, I hope it benefits everybody in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So, if you agree that this kind of work is benefiting people, please, step up and give me some of your money so that I can keep doing this.
Yeah, please. And at the very least, get the word out so the net gets bigger. You may not be able to afford it every month, and that's fine. But at the very least, tell your friends, share this information. This is all for a better community in the long run. So as always, we appreciate everybody for tuning in. Thank you very much, Andrew, again, for your time and for everything you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
And we're going to have you back on. Remember, everybody, all our citations and references are at www.theweedout.com. We are active on the social media, so look for us there. Go to find us on any of your podcast players. Look, like, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. That's all I have for today. Joanna, do you want to say anything to the people before we sign off for the day?
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Andrew, so much, as always, for all that you do. And I can't wait to have you on again to talk about the progression of this case. And everyone, just be well and take care.
Take care, everybody.